Sorry about that.
That's
I'm
okay.
sorry, what'd you say?
I just said that I love. There are moments when I listen to music and I say, "Wow, that's the band that I want to be in." You know.
Oh wow, cool.
Especially because of the type of music. I moved to California, and then I moved back to Chicago. But I think I'd gotten there in 2007, and I left in 2011 when my daughter was born. And I tell her she's the original Valley girl. But I was searching for that Southern California, but very rootsy sound that exists, but you have to look hard for it because it's not like the old days.
Yeah. There's LA has a very rich scene that has gone through several waves. I mean, I think the Buck Owens, Merle Haggard era, just broadening it out to Southern California, was just incredibly original and influential. And then the 60s sort of psychedelia sort of filtered those same guitar licks into country rock. And there were minor waves through the 80s. There was a thriving country scene in Los Angeles. Our bass player, Paul Marshall, was a big part of that at the Palomino. He was part of the house band, and it kind of went under the radar, but there was plenty of country in the 80s and 90s. And as far as Southern California, the wave we are kind of associated with began late 90s. People like Randy Weeks and Mike Stinson and Tony Gilkison, Rick Shea, and quite a few other bands that I don't know if it was just the timeline or they really sounded new, but that was the wave that we kind of rode for about 10 years. And we formed in 99, and we didn't know about these other bands. We thought we were the only new country rock band in Los Angeles. And then we started getting out and started seeing these other bands, like, okay, great. Well, we're part of something. And it was a very rich scene for about 10 years. And now there's a whole new full kind of rock country scene in Los Angeles. You know, all the youngins coming up with probably more bands than ever. I can't even keep track of them, but
don't try.
And they have a sound too.
Yeah. I think keeping track of other bands is one thing if you're trying to make hit records and it's 1965 or something. I think that, but once you kind of tap into that, whatever vein of gold you're going to tap into, you just stay with it, because it's dancing with the one who brung you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of notorious for not listening to other people's music. It's a friend of mine's motto. I don't listen to other people's music, which I don't, but I probably do less listening than most people. So there's a sort of insularity there to begin with. But you hear it, all the influences filter in.
They sure do.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say Merle and Graham Parsons and really hardcore bluegrass people like Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers and the Seldom scene, throughout the years, Dillard and Clark. They kind of are, if there's a DNA, those are probably some of the main strands.
My buddy was telling me, we all have these little family revelations, when you learn something about your dad or something. And my friend called me yesterday, and he's a really passionate fan of mostly the Grateful Dead and all of its
the Dead. I need to mention the Dead, of course.
Yeah.
Gigantic influence. How could I forget that?
Yeah, well, listen, it's undisputable. But he was telling me that he found out. So my dad produced a show once. He put on a show. He promoted it here in the Midwest. This was in Madison, Wisconsin. He said it was the Byrds, the New Colony Six, which was a Chicago area band. And I think it was the New Colony. It was one of those bands. And then the Dillards. And I said, you have no idea. Wow. This is the coolest story I've heard all day. Your dad promoted a show. And could you imagine? I think Chris Hillman probably knew the entire Dillard band, from the Byrds. And and it's the blossoming of this great American art form. Tell me about you. Now, this is you and your brother that started the group?
Well, it goes a little further back to, I mean, I started kind of with country music in Los Angeles. I got in the dormitory at UCLA was to my ear, still one of a truly advanced bluegrass guitar player named Greg Gold from San Bernardino. He'd gotten lessons from the San Bernardino guys, and it's very strict Doc Watson flat picking technique. And at the same time, I was trying to learn electric guitar. So I kind of had I'm kind of a hybrid of those things, you know, I don't know, Cream and James Burton and whoever I randomly heard at the time. And then this very different flat picking technique. So my roots, and then I did country bands in the 70s. You know, I was in one of those bands where you get in the station wagon, you drive to Ely, Nevada, you play 6 nights, 5 sets a night. On the 7th day, you do not rest. You drive to Idaho City and do it all over again. So wow. I got some pretty good hardcore training in, and you had to do all the classic, you know, country stuff. So I did that for quite a while, and then and then I dropped it in 1980. I heard, or 79, I heard the Cars and X, and that was it. A voice went off. You are not doing country anymore. I mean, I just dropped it like a hot potato.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. That's LA. I mean, it's like, and I mean, I have some legit roots. My mom is from the O'Hares and the Saunders, and they're pretty. They came to the San Joaquin Valley in the 1860s. I've seen the land grant signed by Ulysses S. Grant on the wall on their farmhouse out on Panama Lane in Bakersfield, and they were legitimate dairy and farmer people up until very recently. And my cousins still are in the farming business out in the valley. So, but that's
those are the most legit roots I've heard of in a long time.
They're pretty legit. On the other hand, I never got behind a plow. And my dad was a ranch foreman too. He came out, met my mom, went to Cal Poly agricultural school, became a ranch foreman in Blythe. So we pretty much grew up as you know, rural people for the first 12 years of my life. But I was not behind the plow or anything. It was, you know, but we were sort of in this roots, I don't know, country, rural, definitely redneck culture for.
Did you ever play that great song, I'm an old cowhand from the Rio, where he says, like, I've never roped a steer, never done it, you know, I've never.
Yeah.
It's just like, and then like sarcastically says like yippee-ki-yo, you know, at the end.
I did learn I can ride a horse and shoot a gun, and if you stand still, I can rope you. But no, I was an odd spectator. My cousins were badass farmers and rodeo champs. Then they got into football. I mean, there were 2 like pro or semi-pro people came out of the football games on the lawn in Bakersfield. One of whom was Bear Pasco, who had a pretty, you know, he had a career in the NFL. So they're all kind of hard ass, badass, you know, Bakersfield people. But then we moved to LA and wide open to all the musical influences. But Rob his family's from Memphis and Mississippi, so he has very deep Southern ties. But again, he's once removed. His dad is a doctor, moved to Rochester, Minnesota, and that's where Rob grew up. But you know, would go home every summer. So we all have this sort of slightly filtered, you know, Americana roots to start with. And Rob and my.
It's more than Bob Dylan could ever claim. I mean, that guy was creating a backstory.
Yeah. No, we were pretty immersed in the American rural way. But so Rob and Anthony were up in San Francisco, formed a band called the Magic Television, which was kind of country rock in the mid-late 90s. And I would sit in with them on lap steel. And then they moved down, the magic of television, to make it big in Los Angeles. And of course, broke up within like 5 months, that's the formula for breaking up a band. You move to the big city to hit it big, it certainly filters out the ones that aren't going to happen.
It's interesting that you said that that you really, the light went on when you heard bands like X and that punk rock world, and that's ironic, not ironic, but for me, those guys were my gateway to roots music.
Very much, I get that. Yep.
I mean, I was in high school the year that that Knitters record came out. Poor little critter on the road, and I'd already heard X thanks to a counselor at camp. I started to think that the new wave and punk guys were cool because they had short hair and it was like 50s,
Yeah.
But think about Dave Alvin and John Doe and all those other people that constellated in their little world. They were authorities on roots music. Dave Alvin was encyclopedic, when Phil Alvin taught, and I had to buy this stuff in magazines. I wasn't going online because there was no online. And it was just very cool. That makes sense that, first of all, you were still young when that music was coming out in 1980, and you probably had been out playing in a certain kind of scene that got stale. And I think that's so cool.
Yeah, it was, there was a number of things. The country things seemed, Urban Cowboy and, God bless him, Garth Brooks and all that stuff. I just didn't dig it. And I still don't. It's just, I think it took a very strange turn. To this day, I don't really relate to stuff coming out of Nashville, other than the playing is extraordinary. The musicianship's ridiculous, but I don't dig the songs that much. So yeah, it was a way out, and the seeing X and the Blasters and the Plugs was just happenstance. My girlfriend, and I went down to the outdoor thing at UCLA, and there's X playing for like 11 people and the Plugs, and they're like, "Hey man, want to hang out with us?" There was no one. But I'm like, this is I don't know. It was a visceral, I was in, I want to play this kind of music. And I didn't, but I joined like kind of a rootsy psychedelic experimental band called Andy and the Rattlesnakes, who we would kind of do a lip service to, punk and the eighth notes and all that, but not really. And right away, it became very experimental, but I did get immersed in the LA scene and form the connections that exist to this day. I'm playing with people that I played with in 1980. It's one of the great things about LA. It's really a supportive, large, and I think non-competitive musical tribe. Everyone plays on each other's projects and wishes each other the best. It's really and very I like to brag about this too. I think it's one of the least sexist and always has been scenes in Los Angeles. It's it's obviously not perfect, but it's just not a big deal, your gender on any given instrument. Yeah, that's great. Blind luck, coming back from my little country apprenticeship into a really rich scene.
I still love all that country stuff, even if you got to play the hits of the day in the mid-70s. It wasn't what I think. Who was that great crooner from Austin? He sang with Bob Wills. I'll remember his name. He was a great singer. Ray Price.
Oh, Ray. Oh, yeah.
Ray Price described country sometime in the mid-90s. Sounds all that like that Eagles crap, and that Eagles crap wasn't as crappy as stuff that would go on now, but you always had, thank God Jim Lauderdale's made a real impact in that world, and written great songs, and Buddy Miller. So it's the Americana thing is like, that has caught on. I don't like that assignation for some reason. I just think it kind of cheapens that gorgeous.
It was very useful at first,
Yeah.
Americana, because there was the Nashville monolith, and these bands like Jim Lauderdale, people that came out of, they weren't famous, they weren't born famous. So it's like, okay, this is a deliberate sort of Luddite throwback to whatever Nashville isn't doing right now. And it was partly a reaction to that, partly a scholarly like love for this incredibly rich body of work that already existed. So it was useful to differentiate from Nashville country music. But then it just became, Nashville knows, oh, Americana, okay. And then all of a sudden Bob Dylan, and I called Americana the place where rockers go to die, because, suddenly Springsteen's, Americana and Dylan and that. So it sort of knocked the smaller bands off the radar a little bit. But at first, for people like Wilco and any number of bands, the Jayhawks, etc., they needed an umbrella to sort of, here's a scene, and there was a lot of shared ethos or musical ideas, lyrical ideas. I thought it was legit for a long time. Now it's just everything,
I know but then again, if it's, I don't want to be a malcontent and denigrate anything, but it's whatever. I do like that music.
Yeah.
It's funny. Where did you grow up in Los Angeles?
Well, no, I grew up
after 10 years old.
I mean, we moved to LA when I was 12.
Okay.
Tremendous culture shock. I went from, we in Ventura County, first it was Bakersfield, and then we moved to Blythe, California, where my dad was a ranch. That's where he got his big break, a ranch foreman there for the Bard family, a really old California family.
Wow. Turning
desert land into farmland by hemp planting. Interestingly enough, you do 2 seasons of hemp, and it's a soil. It puts nitrogen in or does hemp put nitrogen in the soil? One of them puts nitrogen in the soil, and it turns like really kind of hard soil into something you could plant cotton and alfalfa in, and it was a lot of acreage. And so then Ventura County for 5 years, way out in the country. We had no neighbors, and then age 12, 7th grade, suddenly in Catholic school, a year behind everyone, because Catholic school is, pretty hardcore scholarly, and, living by the freeway and the airport and walking on sidewalks. It was a shock to our systems, but it was full
near Inglewood. Were you near Inglewood?
Right near Inglewood, yeah. A place called Westchester. You cross La Cienega, and there's West. We were like a block from Inglewood, but
that's where the Turtles went to high school.
I think they went to Westchester High. Yeah. I just
read one of their books, Howard Kalin. It's amazing though that you really do have that that pedigree, because you're describing the whole California sound, and the fact that
I'm just talking about it, I'm realizing it was kind of all over the place and completely haphazard, but one way or another, me and everyone in our band has heard, just absorbed it. It was there. It was actually, when I was, a serious bluegrass guitar student, you go to all these festivals out in Norco and, the Bodie, the ghost town, and, San Bernardino. And, I'm trying to get into a picking session circle with a banjo player, but there's way too many guitar players. In the background, I hear this electric band, and I'm like, not interested. I'm just trying to, play Salt Creek with somebody. Finally, after the 3rd festival, this band's still there. They're just playing on the stage. And I'm like, wow, that guitar player is really good. And I think it was James Burton. but the band was Emmylou Harris's hot band. They were just formed, couldn't get arrested. You know, they had their deal, but they're playing bluegrass. You know, there's 100 people at the Bluegrass Festival, and there's Emmylou Harris's hot band. So finally, I'm like, wow, this is really good. You know? But it was just like there, you know. I mean, Graham Parsons would play the Palomino for like 8 people. It was, I mean, it was
Did you go? Were you at the Palomino? Did you ever go there?
No. I played, you know, it's funny, I played there many times in the 80s, but not in country bands. They did rock, they did everything. You name it. So it became a rock club with country on certain nights. But no, I never saw any of those guys. Emmylou Harris is about as far back as I can go as far as seeing some of the originators.
You really did. And I love that whole era. Again, the best thing I think, you know, I've got to credit my dad for just bringing the right records home, because I remember even as a little kid, he bought the Adventures of Panama Red of the New Riders. Yeah. And that was, you know, Buddy Cage playing pedal steel on that. And it just blew my mind. And then when I started getting into X and the Blasters, my dad brought home a Dwight Yoakam record. And on that record, he thinks X and the Blasters. I said, wow, there really is a confluence of different genres, the coolest of the cool coming together. And then I would get those little compilations called A Town South of Bakersfield. Which had, and that in a sense really kind of drew the line in the sand. Like, wow, the stuff coming out of Nashville traditionally sounded so different from the music, the country music from the West Coast. I'm going to investigate that. And that's what I love about your band, is that I'm hearing all of those California things in there. It
was, I mean, as far as the way, well, it also, I mean, our first record, our fiddler is Dwight Yoakam's fiddle player, you know, Brantley Kearns, who actually makes an appearance on our new record, which we're very happy about. Cool. And our bass player was, you know, David Jackson from the Dillards and Emmylou Harris. And then Chris Hillman played on our third record. And I mean, so, and the Dwight people, we all, you know, his latter bands, I played with, you know, we've played with all those guys. And
Marshall, there was a drummer named, I think Marshall or something. I'm not sure, because he toured with John Doe. I met him once, but he was on the Guitars Cadillacs, or the first, I think it was that record. Anyway, so that's amazing.
I don't know him, but you know, Paul Marshall is who was in the Strawberry Alarm Clock. They never really had a singer on that first record, so when they started touring, he auditioned and got the gig, and he toured with Strawberry Alarm Clock. Became very good friends with Ed King, still one of my towering hero guitar players, who went on to, you know, join Lynyrd Skynyrd, and basically, to me, invented Southern rock guitar along with about 4 other people. Those Ed King licks are the, you know, the 10 commandments of Southern rock.
What were some of his early recordings?
Whose recordings?
Ed King's. Like, when did you first start? When was he sort of, when could he be heard playing country music prior to Skynyrd and maybe a little after?
I don't think he did. I think he went from, you know, but young prodigy in Los Angeles, formed Strawberry Alarm Clock, plays bass on a lot of their hits. He's a monster was R.I.P. monster musician. You know, signature guitar parts, bass parts. I think Paul Marshall said that's him on Freebird on bass. I could be wrong, but on the first the early Skynyrd records. So yeah, he went from Strawberry Alarm Clock, meets young Lynyrd Skynyrd on tour, joins the band, and you know, I don't know if he ever did country music. The way he evolved his guitar playing is complete mystery. It's like no one sounded like that. Suddenly here's Ed King, who sounds like these ridiculously advanced guitar licks that you still need to study, and they are complex guitar licks. So he was a big influence too. Now that I think about influences, my country band, you had to do several Skynyrd songs. So I would, I studied Ed King quite a bit, as a fledgling guitar player.
How don't you feel like you get? I'm a musician as well, and I feel like I get better and better every year. It doesn't matter. I'm learning something new all the time.
Oh yeah, you keep practicing, you get better. You don't practice, you stay where you are. I feel like, and I sort of learned a lesson. Sometimes, I'm in quite a few bands in LA, and we put out a lot of records. Half the time you're on the computer, promoting something, typing all day long how great you are to people. So you can really stop practicing. You can go weeks without really practicing. Maybe you're doing your gigs, but in the last few years I've learned just to hit it every day if you can. And because when you're practicing, I'm fairly self-taught. I've had a couple lessons over the years, but it's mostly what are they doing? Stealing stuff off records. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of stopped doing that, and now I find there's a dialogue with your instrument. I'm working on something right now. If I go 2 weeks or 2 months and I start playing again after I, warmed up again, I'm going to start with whatever I was doing. There's a conceptual sort of dialogue you have with your instrument. If if that's your approach, if you're an improviser, songwriter, whatever. So if you drop it for 2 months, your progress stops. Not just your fluidity, but your dialogue, your path is put on hold. So I've become, in my old age, a real believer in play every day. That's how you advance. And
that was the most eloquent thing I have ever heard. I'm not kidding. That was so beautiful. I just got chills because you learn something new. I just learned something too, in that it really is I swear to fuck to God, what you just said just really resonated with me.
Oh, it's a law of the universe.
Oh,
absolutely.
It's a dialogue. Who would have thunk that?
Like Pablo Casals, he's practicing in his 90s, and they say, "Why are you doing that?" And he's like, "I'm making progress." And of course, like, ha ha ha, and it's like, no, he was making progress. Maybe the reporter doesn't hear it, but he's working on something that is personal to him that might not show up in concert for a year, but he's in that dialogue. Is it's every time you pick up the instrument. I figured out this thing yesterday, and it's like, if I play it again today, it's going to become part of my vocabulary. If I don't, it will kind of disappear. So
wasn't there a moment when you hit that one note or did one run and you said, wow, that was so much easier than I thought it would have been to try and do that? And I'm pissed at myself for not trying that fucking 10 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, yes. That's a good point. I'll return to, and if you keep playing, your natural fluidity and chops grow. So something that I would have struggled with 20 years ago is like, you can just hear it and play it. It's one of the advantages of being an experienced player, is your ears do get bigger, and you can just sort of learn something on the spot. Whereas if you've been playing 2 or 3 years, you're going to be like, how does that go? And, I'm talking about medium level stuff. If I'm hearing something by, there's this guy named Eric Gales. I don't know if you've heard him. It's not Eric Gales, the stuff guitar player, the R&B player from the 70s, 80s, 60s. It's Eric Gales with an S. Kind of Hendrix, but he plays upside down, but he plays the strings upside down too. So he's more playing like Albert King backwards. But wasn't
Albert King already playing backwards though?
Albert King's a lefty.
Yeah.
I'm left-handed too, so I'm quite immersed in the lefty lore. like when I play, I have a lefty Telecaster, but I flip the strings. So it's really like playing right-handed. It's the same technique.
Mhm.
Albert King does not flip the strings over when he flips the guitar.
Mm.
So the fat string is where the skinny string should be and vice versa. He's literally playing backwards.
Right.
Hendrix did not. Hendrix played conventionally. This guy, Eric Gales, plays like Albert King. He's playing backwards. I want to use an example of someone you don't just hear it and learn and, oh, I can play that. It's like, no, this guy is ridiculously advanced. So for that level, you're going to have to sit down and what's he doing? But I should differentiate between virtuoso playing and more simple lick oriented stuff. The virtuoso stuff is, if you delve into someone else's world, you're gonna be sweating it.
Yeah, well, I mean, a guitar lick could change, in an art form. Like look at Chuck Berry, just kind of,
Yeah, foundational. That and you sort of have to do it. You may want to be original, but you're not going to sound like it. There's a balance between being in a genre and wanting people to like you and being original, because if you're too original, it's like, well, that's not a genre. That's just, and more power to you. You're doing something really original, but sort of advancing in a genre like country rock or jazz is, you do have to learn the basics, and you have to sort of play the basics and make them your own. But there's no getting around a Chuck Berry lick.
No,
you got to know it.
I picked up the mandolin recently, and I can't put it down. Although I just broke a string. I've never had to buy mandolin strings.
Oh yeah,
or string a mandolin. No, but it's
good luck to you.
Yeah. Another part of my brain opened up because I found that all the little horns or hornpipes or fiddle things in every song that I've ever loved and heard that I've committed to memory, be it like a line from a Pogue song to the Dubliners to normal bluegrass. I've found that I could play this stuff because of the way the strings are. It's like a fiddle. I couldn't. It's impossible to do that on guitar. And so that was a gift. And I'll tell you, my pinky's so much stronger now playing mandolin. Playing guitar because of the mandolin.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, that raises a really interesting point about the instrument itself, the structure of the instrument, how it's tuned, influences the melodies. Yeah, if you play mandolin, you're like, of course, that's where fiddle did it, and that's where a fiddle tune came from. It's right there,
right?
Because it's tuned in fifths. You have more reach. Same as violin. It's identical to mandolin. So
I feel like a musician finally.
Yeah, no, the instrument will teach you if you're sitting around. I mean, and we're gigantic fans of Irish music. I mean, ridiculous. My wife and I went off the deep end for Irish music. I mean, it's, my mom's Irish. Her whole background is Irish.
Is your wife Irish?
No. She's Jewish. My dad's Jewish. My wife's Jewish. So my DNA. I did my DNA. It's half Jewish, Ashkenaz, half Irish. There's nothing else.
I'll tell you. I will. Let's make a bet right now. I will. When we are off the interview, you'll tell me what your DNA. I did an ancestry test. I'm 100% Ashkenazi. I'm related to every Jew I've ever met. Yeah.
Oh, it's all.
And then I'm your new cousin.
Oh yeah.
And now you know me for life.
Yeah. It's a very inbred, insulated, tribe. It's funny because like when you do your DNA, that's one thing, it'll show you the counties you might be from in Ireland. And I'm like, wow, they got it. It's weird. They really got the counties my mom's people are from. You go to the Ashkenaz side, it's just a map of Europe.
Well, if you
there's no DNA associated with a specific part of Europe because it was a very, they were closed off.
We didn't come from Europe.
So it's almost like a monolithic DNA group that's It's only geographical association is with a very large area. So you could be related to anyone from London to, you know, Eastern Russia and be a very close relative. It's very trippy dynamic.
I found this is the coolest part is that I found, if you look at the map on where you have cousins, because they have a list and then a map on Ancestry. And I said, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Jamaica? I looked at this woman, corresponded with her. She's half Jamaican, and the other half, she said, I thought my father was from Scotland. You know, he wasn't. You know, I want to find out how. And she's lovely, lives in Kingston, and I want to find out. And that's the fun thing, is that if you know where your grandfather came from, like it could have been in Belarus, it could have been in Lithuania, which was often part of Belarus, or Latvia. So it's a little easier, but thankfully people have done our family trees. But I wish I had some Irish in me.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying. And if my family, I know where my grandfather's from. The village, the town, as a matter of fact, because you find out through your family roots, through records, and we know. My wife and I both know where a lot of our ancestors are geographically from. I'm just saying, based on DNA, you get no clues. It's a wandering group that stayed intermarried, and so it's fascinating that the DNA doesn't really give you clues. You definitely have to know your family history. Yes. That's the only place you're going to get it.
And some people, I don't think there weren't that many fond memories from those areas. Otherwise, grandparents weren't, they wouldn't have been leaving a place they've known their whole life. But I'll tell you this, and I'll tie it back into roots music, is there's, you look at the Bob Dylans and the Mike Bloomfields, who knew, especially Bloomfield, knew he could play like Merle Travis. He could play like, the blackest blues guy from, the South Side of Chicago or the West Side, and same with Dylan. I mean, people believe that he was some kid from, Galveston.
Oh, they were legit scholars. They weren't like, excuse me, I gotta get some water. I'll be right back.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dylan. I kind of, excuse me, I kind of appreciate Dylan's self-created myth more each year, partly because you look at those old clips of the reporters grilling him, and the reporters you just hate. They're like Time Magazine, and I went to Harvard, and they're so condescending, and and yet they're stupid, and their questions are rooted in ignorance of the thing they're supposed to be covering.
Yeah.
So you see Dylan going, this is such a joke. Let me make this interesting. And but I think he was a born liar or storyteller to begin with. And also Dylan's a combination of incredibly canny self-promoter, liar, and channeling the gods. I mean, it's a fascinating, it's like humans are so contradictory, and he's the ultimate contradiction, which I love. You have to embrace contradiction in humanity, or you will go nuts, and everything exists in everyone. So here's this canny guy saying, okay, Jewish kid from Hibbing, Minnesota. Not very interesting, So I'm Bob Dylan. I rode the rails with Cisco Houston, and it is kind of a dilemma if you're from a Jewish background, because I have no roots in the Appalachians, none, and yet I want to play bluegrass,
But that's the Jew. That's the Jewish. Yeah. Like you will devour everything there is to know about that other idiom, and. Look, I mean, you mentioned bluegrass people. I don't know, not Tony. There's a famous Jewish, like the best banjo player in modern day. Now, I don't know. It's not Tony Trishka, but it's somebody.
Bella Fleck.
Yeah, well, Bella, part Jewish, you know, and then
Is he part? Yeah, yeah.
he might be all Jewish.
Now, but yeah, there's in bluegrass. There's David Bromberg, who Brantley, our fiddle player, played with.
Grisman.
Phenomenal player. Scholar. Can play with anybody. It's a thing. It's a sort of a rootless people falling in love with something that has very deep roots, and it creates a little dilemma. You're always kind of an outsider, Jewish guy, but he's really good for a Jewish guy, so it's sort of an unspoken thing in any genre. It's like, if you're Jewish, you are an outsider. It's just the nature of the 5,000-year relationship with.
Look, every culture has its downsides, and that hypersensitive feeling of misplacement and everything. However, you could look at it in wherever we are, we love this country. It's actually there's a commandment. I'm not very religious, but there's even a prayer blessing in the king of whoever is letting you in. Now we're part of the fabric in America, and we should always have our passports in case some shit happens. But it brings out the Irving Berlins and and all of its predecessors, and antecedents and stuff like that, who are Jewish, who really like we've gotten into country music.
Oh no! If you took the Jewish artists out of American music, it would shrink by about 30%, I think, and some of the core influences. There's just no denying it. It's a might be an outsider group, but it's kind of exploding with talent. So, maybe it'll all go away someday. Maybe all our ethnic boundaries will disappear and stuff. I mean, it's a trade-off, a lot of the European music I like is really from a village. It's like if it's whether it's klezmer or Bulgarian music or Hungarian or all the various Turkish musics, and extended to Northern Africa. The stuff that gets me is relatively local and relatively few international influences, and more the village influence, the village scale, the village instrument singing. It's so when I see hybridized, like Celtic Mali music and a group of musicians, I don't know. It's like, excuse me, wow.
We'll wrap it up soon. We could talk for hours.
No, I had too much coffee.
That's all right. I love that you and your wife went down the Irish rabbit hole, because it's you hear Ronnie Drew singing like the all triangle, and it's you can't stop.
Yeah, which oddly enough is a modern. I mean, maybe I'm sort of generalizing terribly.
No, I don't think you are.
If a Celtic musician and a guy from Mali get together, it might be the best thing you've ever heard. And so I'm just saying, there's something about the very local ancient thing that will disappear with the globalization of music. And the Dubliners are an interesting example of that. I mean, the Old Triangle is written by Brendan Behan or his brother for a radical play in Dublin. It's not a traditional song. But where it came from, it was one step from this hair-raising ballad that was in this village for 400 years, so but yeah, to me, it's all, what do you do with the roots music, I guess? If you're a great songwriter, you're going to do something great.
What really struck me, I was watching one of those great documentaries on a BBC YouTube thing about Irish music, and that all that root stuff was regional in the 40s and 30s. Like the people.
Still is.
Yeah, and the teenagers
Put a
listening,
player, the
we
fiddlers
like
and
Tony
players
Bennett
feel-
and Frank Sinatra.
Oh, yeah.
And then they brought it back. It was like a national kind of initiative to go out and record all these traditional fiddle players, but that it's now very mainstream in that culture, but it really wasn't. That's what I learned.
My experience, and like I said, my wife Victoria and I have gone off the deep end for Ireland. We've gone there like
Good.
8 times, and I mean, we spent more time in Ireland than any other country by a factor of 20. So, and would go to all the little regional areas and the pubs and the fiddle festivals, and it's beyond thriving. I mean, you walk into a pub and there's an 11-year-old kid. She's playing Olean pipes and her grandfather's on accordion, and you might as well set up a mic and make a record because they're that good. All over Ireland, it's the traditional sound is beyond flourishing. It's incredibly vital and very regional. You know, the Clare fiddler is going to sound different from the Donegal fiddler or the Kerry fiddler. It's distinct and it's real, and it's I'm happy to say it's really I don't know how broken the link is. I mean, are these Kerry fiddlers learning from records, or did they learn from their parents and their parents? I think it's both, but it certainly feels like it's coming right out of the soil when you're sitting in the pub listening. It's very gratifying to see it happen.
I was even surprised to learn that Andy Irvine was just a straight up Londoner with no Irish roots or partial roots.
Yeah.
But so
it's about immersion, you know, if you immerse yourself, I mean, it's called paying your dues, and it's a real thing. And it takes a tremendous effort. You've got a lot to overcome if you're not from a genre. You've got to spend extra time on it because your dad didn't show you that lick. You got it off a record, and you have to overcome maybe a sense that you don't really own it. You know, Earl Scruggs kids are like, well, yeah, of course I'm a country musician, you know, but like someone else, like, and the Pogues are a good example of that too. You know, they learned the traditional stuff. I think a few of them had really traditional upbringing with playing, but I think they also just really worked hard to master penny whistle and
we should wrap it up.
Yeah, but we didn't go out. We went down a rabbit hole.
But
this thing is
those are the best conversations. I mean, I'm happy. Listen, I'm happy to talk about the bands, but I think, you know, we could do that. I could talk for as long as you can.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
No, seriously.
No, I'm glad you have this very intense background. Yeah, that's why we went down that rabbit hole. We obviously
listen. I could talk about it till the cows come home.
I'm sorry.
I could talk about it till the cows come home.
Yeah.
Or I could talk to the cows until you come home.
Right. Yeah.
What? So, are you going to be? I saw that you played the Old Town School here in Chicago.
Long time. Yeah. Chris Hillman invited us out. We opened for I think it was him and Herb Peterson.
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you, if you know, a bunch of my records got damaged, and one of which, I mean, I've replaced all digitally or whatever, but I had the first Desert Rose Band record, I think it was, and somebody wrote the most beautiful liner notes about it. And I'm trying to find out who the fuck wrote it. You know, he broke down all the things that you and I are talking about into like a liner note. And if I find it, I'll send a copy to you.
Sure, I'd love to. Yeah.
Just the photo. But what I was going to tell you, I do love the reason why I'm so, I think that it entered a different dimension, our conversation, when we started talking about Irish music and then Jewish stuff. But it has something, and then that's what I want. I want to wax existential about our identities and how it fits into the larger world.
Ultimately, it's the most important thing. The Irish and the Jews are downtrodden people, period. there's no other word for it. Downtrodden, crushed, marginalized, starved, beaten, killed, etc. So, and over time, you sort of, when you come out of the chaos of childhood, you sort of look back on your parents and you go, that's why they do that. We're dealing with people, the echoes of trauma, and every culture has its trauma. The Puritans who came over and sort of ruled America with an iron fist, they were escaping something. Everyone's roots have deep trauma. So knowing your own trauma, you can sort of, you can see how it informs your life, and it's going to inform your music, your lyrics, the way you play guitar, the way you sing. If the DNA of how you look is equally matched by the DNA of how your parents held you, raised you, scolded you, let you be free or not be free, played fiddle or didn't play fiddle. That's your DNA as much as your hair color or anything else. So and it's so intimate and unconscious that it's kind of a nice mystery. You'll never really know what your Donegal ancestor did to influence a lyric or something, but they did.